So as you were saying, the curatorial idea for these four workshops, which aim to sort of um, develop or speak to or nurture critical thinking, choreographic practice, rather than a learning of a technique or a skill. Those are the aims of the intensive workshops that we are doing, including New Clearage. And you proposed a structure which would be bringing in um, a piece that you'd already made. Uh, and how does it work with a new group of people in a new place, in a context, new city? So, how does how do you see that manner of working in a workshop which is not skill based necessarily, talking to the aims of what these workshops are about?
Yeah, so I think for me the first idea for the proposition was to find a site and then to dialogue with what the body has to offer to the site and vice versa. So this was the starting point of the whole endeavor. And then the idea of reconstruction became important also. So how does an existing set of principles then begin to open up or readdress themselves when put into the site, when attacked by a new group of people? So these were two key things that seemed important. From the point of view of a site, I think it's damn good because uh, it forces you to go away from certain ideas of comfortable working,
Especially in a site like
especially like the tram depot. There is no place to actually use the skills you already have in a usual manner. You really have to re-employ things, you have to really think differently, and it's so huge and so vast and so endless that it's inevitable for you to think that the body by itself, in isolation, doing what you anyway know, is not going to really be visible or really, contribute to meaning differently. So therefore, to attack scale, the idea of scale doesn't mean that everything you do has to be on a grand scale, but then how do you inscribe the body in a space like that became important. And you don't have to be always doing something tremendously virtuosic to fill up that scale. It's more an awareness of where you stand and how the coordinates of space pass through your body, and therefore what is the body extending into. So that was an important learning, and that continues to be an important learning as we are midway through the workshop. The other important idea was the reconstruction, which is not recreating the work.
Yeah.
So it's not taking it brick by brick and putting it back together. The part that I've chosen to reconstruct from the jumping project, of course, I chose the jumping project simply because it is a physicality that I thought would dialogue with the space quite well. That it has a certain power to its grammar, and there's a certain simplicity also which allows the body to be seen rather than how beautifully is the body moving. So these are important considerations somewhere. Having said that, it's an incredibly complex bit of mathematics that is having to be understood and assimilated and sort of interpreted. And I find there is a value to it. I mean, I thought a lot about it. 10 days, is it too much? But I think it's sufficient to deal with the concept of time in this way. That there is a musical structure in time that you are counting out to, and that you're allowing your body to receive this idea of waiting, moving very precisely, moving as part of an ensemble that you can't, if you remove one brick, then the whole thing collapses. So I think these are incredibly interesting and important learnings, especially in today's environment when the teaching learning has become very individualized and very isolated. I find that there is a value in understanding a community feeling, a sense of an ensemble, without being part of this massive sort of company structure.
Yeah.
So I think this has been the goal of trying to, somehow attack both sides of the equation. And there are many things that are coming out of the dancers themselves, and it's a very mixed group, luckily.
Yeah.
The people are coming from really diverse backgrounds, from very different points in their practice. Some are very, very new, some are very, sort of mid-career professionals, whatever that means, but there is a fair amount of trust that's having to be shared between people, which is quite nice to see evolving. And I can see that it is sort of bringing forth a lot of questions. I can see that it's not, going towards completion in any conventional sense, but then it's opening up many different doors. And we're right in the middle of it, so it's kind of the turning point usually when things have to sort of, you're beginning to see where it's going, the direction is beginning to get clear. So yeah, the idea is to keep pushing as far as possible on both fronts, the reconstruction front and the site exploration front. Yesterday we started using materials physically from the site, trying to see what kinds of tensions within the same grammar of the piece that we've started making in the space. And I think it's coming from people themselves in terms of what should happen. Little bit of instigation, but then things are coming out. So yeah, it's working out in a funny sense. We have to see how it kind of begins to dialogue towards the end.
So this space, actually, when you were talking about you chose the jumping project because it has a certain power and a certain particular kind of presence and energy to it. And earlier today, when we were talking about the act of jumping being one where the performer or the jumper is unable to cheat. You can't cheat with that ease that you could otherwise in some other performed act. It also strikes me that even in the tram depot, because they're not trams that are running, and because it's one end of the depot where all these retired or not completely unused trams are stored, it has that sense of everything being stripped away in a sense, and then you just see the tram for what it is in terms of whether you look at it in terms of a physical object or you look at it in terms of nostalgia or whatever it is you're looking at it. You're not looking at it as the tram doing a function, just looking at it as something in space. So has that being placed, the jumping project, whatever bit of it that you're doing, being placed in this new kind of site, has it begun to say different things I'm sure it obviously has begun to say, but what kind of different things?
Yeah, so I refer to this area of the tram depot as the graveyard. It's where all the trams have gone to die, kind of thing. So there is a sense of nothing else is moving. So it's not a public site in the sense that you're dealing with the unexpected. So that's one thing. It's all there to stay, and it's only yielding itself to be discovered. The jumping project as such has left my mind. I'm not really looking to recognize any part of it anymore. I think some of the structures are coming in here just to see what could get reawakened from within here. I think there is something solemn that's coming out of the space. Something solemn is coming out of the space. I'm trying to also bring in certain elements of playfulness because there are very many, the tram tracks are already telltale in where they disappear and come from and go to. And, there are all these various signs of possible activity. So it hints at what could have traveled from there in here. You look out and there's one rusted, broken down thing in the yard. So there is a hint of what could have been a passage, what could have been a trajectory, and these are things that do inform what we do after that over there. There's also a thing of picking up objects or trying to look at what function they may have served and how that function is probably being readdressed now. There's a little bit of that going on as well. But largely, I would say that more than a representative sort of dealing with phenomena, it's more a material sort of knowledge that we are working with, you know, with the tensile quality of certain things, or with the leveled quality of certain places, or with the sound certain objects make. It's more this kind of material quality that's beginning to, because it's the most neutral of the lot. It's not throwing you into somewhere else, but bringing you into the here and now.
Yeah, whatever you're encountering.
Exactly. So,
physically in this
yeah.
space. There was one other question that I had just now. When you were talking about scale, actually, and the vastness of, and again, how earlier today, when the sort of exercises with which you wound up the day, which was really asking people to find the smallness and the largeness within whatever they choose to do. And that really I was thinking about how does a body inhabit and fill a space. As you were saying just now, it's not about the bigness of the movement, but it's about being in relation to a certain setting. So, and then again, when Orna started talking in that way about, she was telling me earlier today that she was interested in space and time, and then she told me she's a chess coach. So,
I didn't know,
yeah, I didn't know that either. So then obviously it's chess, so space time very important, but also patterning very important. And then you sort of suddenly see that, oh, okay, that's in a sense a direct connect to how we dancers are also thinking about space, time, patterning, the mathematics of patterning and all that. But to go back to this bigness, smallness, how does the body speak to space and vice versa? What are some of the questions perhaps that have been coming up from these participants who may or may not have done work like this before? As I don't think any of them have worked in a space like this before. So, what are some of the questions or discoveries maybe even that?
I think the initial day of visiting the site was for me to also see what kind of relationships they're making with the space. I've been to the site once before already, and I've had a little more time to think about how these two, reconstruction and site-specific work, could dialogue with each other. So I've put certain checks and balances in my head, but then for them it was the first time of being there. And I think everybody sort of is responding to the specificity of the place, like what can I do in the pit of the tramway, So everyone's very quick to find these niches and spots where they can bodily fill themselves into inside one of the coaches, sliding out through a window or having people sit inside and watch them from there. So it's always been a question of using the body as a unit of measure. This is something I notice with everyone. It seems to be an automatic decision. How much can I scale what? How well do I fit into this, or how can I go under it, or how can I inscribe myself. So there is this very nice, interesting body measure thing that kept happening. And then slowly to sort of help discover how small that could be, and the smallness of it can be very specific, but that it requires you to treat the viewer very differently then. So we talked about whether a group of people is walking along a pathway and encountering, in proximity certain things, or whether they position themselves and, look at a vastness and feel the vastness. For the moment, I have made the decision of the vastness being important somehow, because we could lose that very much. I mean, I did entertain the idea of smaller acts as they could go along and find, but it requires then to do away with the reconstruction idea a little bit and give ourselves entirely to this. So we're still navigating that, and I think even for the initial discovery was nice. How much do I measure myself and how can I fit into this and all of that? But once that newness wore off, what exactly are you saying? You could be fitting very nicely into it, but what
Yeah.
do you want to say? So we started bringing this question in. A, you're not by yourself. You could be one individual act inside a larger thing. But then, what is the larger thing and what is your act in relation to that larger thing is a question that has sort of, through the structure of the work, becoming very present. That question has become very present. So I think, given a longer duration or a longer period of time to work, I'm sure there could be ways of treating space, choices being made in the treatment of space. And the treatment of space is always going to have to attack three areas of perspective. One is the performers, one is the onlookers, and the third is the creators. So all three must always sort of move between one another for it to work. You have to be all three things at the same time, more or less. So this is beginning to become evident, and for these 10 days, I feel I've made a little bit of a choice in what we can achieve a little bit in terms of what could be the sections and what could be the idea of a collective body with a single consciousness. This is the idea I've sort of asked for a greater focus upon right now.
In fact, I think that's also innocent from other things as well, but that sort of central idea is something that informs the original jumping project as well. That you have sometimes 7, sometimes 10, but that number of performers who may be together, may be apart, but that sense of one body with 10 components has always been quite central. That's something that we work very much towards, and I think that as a principle of working choreographically, whether how much of the jumping project remains or doesn't remain in what we see on Sunday is a different question. But that principle of one consciousness with many bodies is, I think, still very much part of it. Especially again, watching those duet and then trio exercises that you've been doing, and how bodies move around each other and become a sort of electron system almost.
That's true.
Which is, and often you see choreography where all this is set out, but you don't think of an electron, because an electron system, they are moving like that because the connections make them move like that.
Right.
Rather than the movement coming first and then the connection may be there or may not be there.
Right.
So that sense of the web of connections is, I saw evidence of that very much in whatever little was being done in terms of exercises this morning. And then how that extends into where you situate it becomes the next level of challenge, I suppose. Because
it is, and I think so that goes back to the choice of space and the choice of this. It needs a group of 8 at least to feel a sense of that collective energy. We would have to make very, very different choices had it been one. It's possible to work with a single person as well. Very, very different. It's a different exercise altogether.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think perhaps because it's been so many years of work with the jumping, it's possible to isolate the process and to build layers into it, and then to offer up those layers for consideration now. So I'm just hoping that people are left with a sense of openness in terms of there not being only one thing to do, but several choices open to you. But how much you need to actually process, train, and what the place of rigor to make that evident. This for me is very important, because it's very exciting to open many doors. But ultimately you need to sort of find you need to choose, and you need to find the way to make that really rigorous. You need to find the right musculature, you need to find the right way to count time, to right stillness, the right sense of who's around you, and where are we in the space. So I feel that would be a valuable knowledge from a workshop to take back.
Yeah. So in fact, that's what, when Shoni was talking about the the waiting in the thing, but it's not waiting like we used to wait. You're waiting with full, well, you should be waiting with full alertness.
Yeah.
And that sort of the kind of electric awareness that it develops.
Yes.
Not just for you as an individual participant in the performance or whatever you want to call it, but also then that that sort of resonates in the space and creates this that makes the space something else.
Yeah.
Makes the space ring with something else.
Exactly. So, and it takes us back to the question, no? I mean, what happened here before, and now is the space actually changing because of what's happening now?
Yeah, yeah.
So,
And given that you are in Calcutta, because the city has the disease, whether it's a disease or whether it's not a disease, I don't know, but it has the pros and cons of nostalgia. And all these spaces are often, especially in sort of photographs and films about Calcutta, all these spaces are often romanticized.
yes, that's true.
But very, very beautifully, because they do have a certain very alluring quality to them, and a solemnness and a quiet sadness maybe to them. But this thing of not looking at them as they are spaces from the past maybe, but this thing of this was there, I'm bringing something to it, therefore what is there now, which may disappear after we go left.
Yeah.
But that I think becomes the exciting, and again that relates back to what I suppose every performance should be,
Yeah.
in terms of the nowness of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So last question, you've already mentioned, there won't be many questions, this is my last question. You've already mentioned one of the takeaways that you're hoping for. But yeah, just to elaborate on that a little bit, and what other sort of, what would you hope that they go back with?
Structure, the importance of structure. A lot of the time I see dancers turning into choreographers. It's as practitioners, at some point you feel, yes, now I need to create the practice, but may not necessarily always have the tools to structure things in play. May be able to move beautifully, but then how do you make an experience unfold? And we all learned it little by little, adding to the toolbox and knowing that no, this alone is not enough, there needs to be something before that. And, oh no, there's not enough to move all over the place, but no, you need to think of, foreground, background, all of that, perspective. How long should you hold a space? So all these things are there on offer in the workshop and in the treatment of the space right now. For example, if you're dealing with like a 70-foot distance to cover performatively, what are the choices you have? How visible are you? You're just a silhouette there, and therefore how do you treat this slow, foregrounding? So I think they will go back with a strong sense of structure and how a thing must unfold. There's one good sort of a template to take back. Questions of how to train the body, because as with most of the works I do, I don't fall back on an existing set of vocabulary to then, so the jumping was not something we ever returned to in any other work, but it meant that you needed to train very specifically for that, So to, learn how to build yourself up for a particular work, that's a training in itself, You may not have all the tools, but you may need to work collaboratively with a few people. And that's when the idea of the work also grows a little bit more. It can't be only what you know.
And it informs how the work is even presented.
Exactly. Not only presented, and how is it owned? I feel this is a very important thing.
Yeah.
Collective ownership, I find, is very important. So I've told the group that I will give them the music and they're free to jump wherever they want, however they want, and do it whenever, preferably do it, a few times over, just for them to stay with this thing a little bit longer. So this is, I think, what is very, very necessary in today's scene, you know. Because we don't have anymore this model of working with a choreographer over some years. I don't think people take to this model very much these days, and I can't argue with the why of it and the economics of it and all the rest of it. So things being as they are, I feel when we offer workshops, we need to address this a little bit. What could be the good structural information that you